All right, guys, today we're going to take a look at triangle congruence and different properties. We're going to start with when we are filling out a congruent statement and what the congruent statement can tell us about the triangles. If we take a look here, we want to finish this out and take a look at our triangles to finish out the congruent statement. And then we can figure out everything else. Your congruent statement, I want you guys to always know, congruent statement tells you everything. Once you have what two triangles are equal, you know exactly which angles, which sides, everything that are congruent. So let's take a look at this picture. Angle A is congruent to angle D, B is congruent to angle E, and angle C is congruent to angle F. So if we want to finish out this statement, triangle ABC is congruent to triangle DEF. Now, again, this statement gives us everything. Once we have this, or even if we begin with this, they don't even have to give us a picture necessarily. If they just give us that statement, that tells us everything. Okay, so we don't even have to look at this picture anymore. Angle A is going to be congruent to angle D because those are the first ones listed. Okay, they're listed in the same place. Angle B is congruent to angle E. Angle C is congruent to angle F. And then we can also list our sides. AB is congruent to DE. BC is congruent to EF. And CA is congruent to FD. Now, notice that we went in a particular order. So look at that last one. CA is congruent to FD. We would not have wanted to put DF because angle C is congruent to angle F. Angle A is congruent to angle D. So you always want to put corresponding pieces in the same place, okay? So if you ever have to fill out one of these, make sure you pay attention to that congruent statement. That tells you everything, which pieces go together. The next thing that we're going to talk about are whether we can prove two triangles are congruent. I have listed here your different theorems for how you can prove congruence. I've also saved it as a picture that should be available in your lesson notes. Okay, so make sure to download that if you want it. All right, let's start going through these. The first type is called side-side-side congruence, and we abbreviate that with SSS. Okay? What this says is that if we have two triangles and we have three sets of sides marked congruent, so three pairs of sides marked congruent, then we have two sets of congruent triangles by side-side-side congruence. The next one, side angle side, that we abbreviate SAS, says that if we have two triangles where we have two pairs of sides marked congruent and the angle that is included between them, then we can say that they're congruent by side angle side. Now, notice that the angle is in between the two sides. Okay, for side angle side, the angle has to be included between the two sides. Okay, if it's not, then it's a different one, or it may not work at all. Take a look at the next one, angle side angle. We have two triangles. We have two pairs of angles marked congruent, and the side that is in between them is marked congruent. Then the two triangles can be said to be proven congruent by angle side angle. Notice again that that is the side included in between the two angles. Now, look at the next one. Next one is angle side, which we abbreviate as AAS. This one also deals with two angles and a side, but they're in different places. Okay? So if we have two angles and a side, then we have the two angles and the non-included side. Okay, so it could be any non-included side, but it's going to be angle side, so it's two angles and the non-included side. Okay, if it was the included side, we'd be going back up to angle side angle. And then the last one, you may want to make a note for yourself. Okay, can only be used with right triangles. Okay, so hypotenuse leg can only be used with right triangles. Now, that is not to say that we will use hypotenuse leg every single time that we have a right triangle. It just means it can only be used when we do have them. Okay, but what hypotenuse leg theorem says is that if we have two right triangles and we have a pair of hypotenuses marked congruent and one of the legs marked congruent, we can say that those two triangles are congruent. Okay. Let's start taking a look at some examples. It's hard to tell what we're talking about when I just show the theorems here. It's a lot easier when we start working through some. So here's some practice problems. We want to decide if they can be proved congruent, and if so, we want to list our reason. If not, we're going to write not possible. Okay. So take a look at at number one. We have two triangles. We have two pairs of angles marked congruent. So we don't have enough yet. Okay, but a lot of times we have to decide, is there something else we can prove about this figure? So take a look at this first one. Notice that they share a common side. Okay, these two triangles have a side that is in common. Obviously, it's going to be the same length in both of those triangles, so we could mark that as congruent. Okay, it's congruent to itself. Now take a look at what we have. We have two angles and we have a side. The side is not included between the two angles in each triangle. So this one is angle, angle, side. We have two congruent triangles by angle, angle, side. Take a look at the next one. We have two pairs of congruent sides. We don't have enough yet, but we notice that they share a third side, which is obviously going to be the same length in both triangles. It's going to be the same length, so we could mark it congruent to itself. Now we have three pairs of congruent sides, so that would be congruent triangles by side, side, side congruence. Next, we want to take a look at this one, but we have nothing marked congruent so far. All we have right now are parallel lines. Okay, remember the arrows on the lines are talking about parallels, so we may have to use some properties from before. We can tell that these two triangles share this side in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and mark that congruent because obviously it's going to have the same measure. Okay. What we can also do is think about some alternate interior angles. This angle would be alternate interior with this one, so they're congruent. This angle would be alternate interior with this angle, so those are congruent. Now we have two pairs of congruent angles, and we have the side that is included in between the two, so we can say that these two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle congruence. And that's an example one, guys. We had nothing marked congruent when we started there. We had to use our parallel line properties and the fact that they shared a line in order to be able to mark that congruent. Next one, we have two pairs of sides marked congruent. So they share a third side. So we could say that these two triangles are congruent by side, side, side congruence. Usually those are pretty easy. We love side, side, side. Take a look at the next one. We have two pairs of sides marked congruent. We don't have anything else. We do notice that we have a pair of vertical angles. So we could say that these two angles are congruent because they're vertical. Now we've got two sets of sides. And we have one pair of angles, but notice that the angles are not included in between the two sides. We had one that said side angle side, but notice that this one we have angle side side. Okay, we can't prove anything else about these triangles, so this one is actually not possible. I'll talk a little bit more about this one. The easiest way for most people to remember, think about what this one is. We have angle, side, side. Think about trying to write that theorem out on your paper. I don't think you really want to be writing ASS on your paper. So that's a quick way to remember that angle, side, side does not work. Okay, take a look at this picture and let's talk a little bit more about why. We do have congruent angles that are vertical, and then we have two congruent sides, but we don't know anything about the two angles here. Those could be totally different measures and still have the same lengths for the sides, right? Okay, they could be just at slightly different angle measures. Okay, so that's why angle side side doesn't work. But a quick way to remember is that you don't want to write ASS on your paper. Number 6, we have a pair of angles and a pair of sides marked congruent. We don't have enough yet, but we could notice that these two angles are vertical and therefore would be congruent to each other. Now we have two pairs of angles and a side included between the two. So we could say that these two triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle congruent. All right. 7, 8, and 9. We want to take a look here. Number 7, we have 2 pairs of angles and the non-included side. It's already marked for us. We don't have to do anything. These two are congruent by angle, side. Okay, take a look at the next one. We have a pair of angles and a pair of sides. We need a little bit more information. Let's see if we can prove anything. We've got a pair of vertical angles here, so we could mark those congruent. Now take a look at our triangle. We have 2 pairs of angles and the non-included sides marked congruent. So again, this one is angle, side. Okay, let's take a look at this last one. This last one, we have 2 right triangles, so we do technically have 2 angles marked congruent because those 2 are right angles, and we have a side marked congruent, okay, one of the legs. Now, we don't have anything else marked congruent. We can't mark anything else on here because we don't have any vertical angles or anything like that, so this one is not possible. Okay, be careful. Don't just write hypotenuse leg because you have a right triangle. That's not always going to work. In this case, it definitely doesn't. We don't have the hypotenuses marked congruent, and we have no way of proving that they are. All right, let's try some more. Number 10. Okay, we have 2 pairs of sides marked congruent. It's not enough yet, but we notice that we have some vertical angles, so we can mark these 2 congruent. Now we have 2 sides and the included angles, so it would be side, angle, side. 11, we have 1 pair of sides marked congruent, and we also have that those 2 sides are marked parallel. So let's think about a couple of things. First of all, these 2 angles are vertical, so we could say that they're congruent. We could say that these 2 angles are alternate interior angles, and therefore they're congruent. We could also say that the last 2 sets of angles are alternate interior, and they are congruent. So we've got 2 triangles. We've got a lot of stuff marked congruent. Notice that we could say by angle, angle, side, or by angle, side, angle, that these 2 are congruent. Either of these would be correct. Okay, you would not have to put both on a paper. You could put either one. Number 12. We have right triangles and we have 1 pair of legs marked congruent. Notice that they share their hypotenuse. So we could say that it was marked congruent because obviously it's going to be the same measure. So taking a look at this one, we have a hypotenuse marked congruent and a leg marked congruent with right triangles. So we could say that these 2 are congruent by hypotenuse leg. 13, similar to number 11 in that we do have a parallel lines and we have 1 set of angles, sides marked congruent. Let's take a look at what else we can prove. They share this side, so obviously it's going to be congruent in the both figures. These angles would be alternate interior, so they would be congruent. And now if we take a look, we have 2 pairs of sides and the included angles, so these 2 triangles could be marked congruent by side, angle, side congruence. 14, we have 3 angles marked congruent. We don't know anything about the sides. Okay. Notice that we did not say angle, angle, angle was a way to prove congruency. Think about why. You can have the same angles and have very different sizes. Okay. They may be similar, like you might be able to prove that they are the same shape, just bigger or smaller, like a dilation that we've done before, but the sides aren't necessarily the exact same length. So this one is not possible to prove. 15, we have 2 pairs of angles. Notice that the triangles share this side in the middle. So now we have 2 angles and the included side, so we could say that these 2 triangles are congruent by angle, side, angle congruence. 16 looks very similar to some we've had before already. We have 2 sides marked congruent, 2 pairs of sides. They share the third side, so it's going to be the same measure in each one. So yes, this is congruent by side, side, side congruence. All right, 17. We have a pair of sides marked congruent already. We have a pair of angles marked congruent already. We know that 2 of the lines are parallel. So let's think about some of the things we could use. These 2 share this side, so it's going to be congruent to itself. And now with parallel lines, we know that these 2 cut by the transversal would be alternate interior. So we do have, we do have congruent angles there. So now let's take a look at what we have. We could say that these 2 triangles are congruent by angle, angle, side. Okay, angle, angle, side would work. We have two pairs of angles, and actually we have two sets of non-included sides marked congruent. So either way around, we have two angles and a non-included side, so angle, angle, side. All right, let's take a look at this last one. We have two angles marked congruent because they're both right angles. And then we have another pair of angles marked congruent. So we have two angles so far. They share a side. Okay, so that's going to be congruent to itself in each one. So now take a look. We have two pairs of angles and the non-included side. So that is angle, angle, side. All right, guys, we're going to do a lot of practice with this. So hopefully that was helpful to go through so many different examples. We went through 18 different ones. All right. Last slide. This is a little bit different because we're going to go backward. Okay. Basically, they're telling us how they're going to be congruent, and we want to figure out what needs to be congruent in order to make those two triangles congruent by the given theorem. Okay. So for the first one, we want to mark that these two are congruent by side, angle, side. So let's take a look at what we have left. Okay. We already have a pair of sides marked congruent and an angle marked congruent. Okay, because they're both 90 degrees. So if we want to use side, angle, side, we need that other side that includes those. So we need this side congruent to this side in order to make that happen. So the last thing that we need is what? AC to be congruent to JL. Okay. So again, we're kind of working backward. They give us the reasoning, the theorem, and then we look at what we have so far, and we have to figure out what we still need to be congruent. So let's take a look at the next one. We want to be able to prove these congruent by angle, side, angle. We have two angles marked congruent. So notice what's missing is the side in between those. So we want to be able to mark the side in between them congruent. Now, this is where definitely making sure that you have your congruent angles match up is very important. Okay, so let's think about how we want to write this one. We want DE to be congruent to JK. Okay, and now we would not write this in a different order. We would not write DE is congruent to KJ because notice D is congruent to J. That's already marked in the figure. Okay, E is congruent to K. So make sure you write that correctly. We've got two more to take a look at doing the same thing. We want to mark them congruent with the given theorem. This one, we want to do side, angle, side. Let's take a look at what we already have. We have a side and we have an angle. So we need the other side. We need that third piece. Okay, we have a side and an angle. So we need the other side that helps include the angle. So we need these two to be congruent. So let's write that out. We need JI to be congruent to, now take a look at the order we went. We went from J to I. So we need that to be congruent to TS. Okay. You could also write IJ congruent to ST. That's fine, as long as those corresponding pieces line up. All right, last one. We want to mark these congruent by angle, side, angle. So let's talk about what is missing from these two. We have an angle and we have a side so far, so we need that third angle. Okay, so we need angle L to be congruent to angle P. And luckily, we're only dealing with one letter here, so we don't have to worry about going in order. We just have one letter. L is congruent to T. Okay. So those are a little bit different because we had to kind of go backward to make sure that those worked out. We were trying to fill in the missing piece to make them be congruent by the given theorem. So we're working backward a little bit there. All right, guys, we're going to do a lot of practice with proving congruence. So hopefully those 18 practice problems we did helped a lot. We're going to do quite a bit more where you get to try it on your own, and we'll see how we do with those.